there aren't many ways in which people can belong. People can belong by religious affiliation, national affiliation. You've got family, you might say clan or tribe. The woke ideology says you can affiliate by sexual orientation, gender, sex, and race. We all know the problems, or we're starting to know the problems that can come from that. The problem underneath this, in terms of answering this question, is we are all very familiar of the ways in which national belonging can go wrong. We should be better at knowing how racial belonging can go wrong in every direction. The obvious answer to all of this, nevertheless, lies in the other forms of belonging that exist. In lieu of racial belonging, or in lieu of religious belonging, which you may come and go, it'll ebb and flow, the most obvious answer to all of this stuff is national belonging. And by the way, I wouldn't give up on that entirely.
Really?
Yeah, I especially wouldn't give up on it in America.
But you are from a small island.
Well, it's not that small.
And yet...
I mean, Crete is small. Malta's small. The United Kingdom's not.
But
Middle-sized
yet you...
outrageous.
But yet we're friends and you're sitting here and we're hanging out and we eat sushi.
Yeah.
And so that like transcend... But the transcendent part of that, of the relationship is... I would say it's a love of truth. We have commonalities.
Well, none of this is to say that these things can't transcend nation. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that as the late Roger Scruton said, that the national belonging is the widest possible application of the first person plural. It's the widest possible application of we. Feeling belonging in things that your nation has done, even if you've not had any role in it. Belonging even maybe when your ancestors weren't in this nation, but you still feel a sense of we about the nation. The reason I say, by the way, that I wouldn't give up on that in America in particular is that the American ideal, many of the American ideals, do have the capacity, the capability, even if it's a flawed one, to transcend racial, sexual, and other lines. Because you can say, it doesn't matter what race you're. I mean, again, people will say this hasn't happened historically, and I'd concede much to that. But you have the ability in this country to say, look, it doesn't matter what damn gender, sexual orientation, or race you are, we're Americans. That seems to me not to be something that should be given up lightly or given up on lightly. It is one very good answer to that, to say we are equal under the law, for instance. What a wonderful aspiration, even if it's not always perfect in practice or exactly met in practice. But my point is that since there are very limited ways to belong in groups larger than the family or the circle of friends, we should revisit and think about all of these things. And the only reason we don't is because we know all of the ways in which they can go wrong. But as I always remind people, everything can go wrong. I mean, love can go wrong. Love can cause wars. Love started the Trojan Wars. We don't try to ban love. We don't remain totally suspicious of love as a consequence of that. Why can't we accept that everything can go wrong, including racial affiliation, gender affiliation, national affiliation, but they can also be the tools to get some things right. And belonging in a nation, it would seem to me, certainly in America, is a way to suppress some of these battles, is to try to get beyond them again, and not to split apart over them. And what I, as obviously a non-American, but as a lover and admirer of this country, think is that it's so sad that so many Americans seem to be giving up on that unifying ideal.
I think that ideal is the shining city on the hill. I think that ideal is what America ought to stand for. And I think that's what's so difficult to me, to see not only the physical acts of violence and physical acts of vandalism, but the intellectual vandalism perpetrated by this. And I don't think that this is a large number of true believers. I think we're looking at a fringe percentage of the population in which they've sucked in a lot of these people to have the beliefs. But I want to go back and I want to answer that question directly. So my response to that would be, it's not a very glorious response, but it's a true one. You have to attend meetings. You have to show up at your workplace when they're having these conversations. You have to know what people are talking about. And when you engage these ideas, the first order of business is for you to learn about them.
Yeah.
Your books have been fantastic. But it's even beyond learning about them. Different people have different skill sets. You're a writer, you're a world famous writer. You can bring a certain skill set to this that other people can't. Maybe some people are artists. Are you an artist?
I'm not.
Okay, well then you can't bring that skill set. So maybe some people can do memes, they can do art. And maybe some people are not artists and they're not writers and they're terrified to speak before people, but they have some financial means. So maybe they want to make a financial contribution. But make some kind of a contribution and know what it is that you're making a contribution to. My other response to that is the Greek value of parrhesia. Speaking truth in the face of danger. We cannot be held hostage to the delusions of other people. We cannot be held hostage to the irrationality and dangerous, divisive nature of this ideology.
Everybody can say the truth as they see it. Everyone can raise concerns whenever they see them. Nobody should be silent. Nobody should feel intimidated. Nobody should put up with being bullied. Not in a free society. In a totalitarian society, in a dictatorship, sure, people have to put up with being bullied. They don't have to put up with it in America. They really don't have to put up with it. So when somebody in your workplace says, you must read these books, ask why. And ask them if they insist you read them, and there are government agencies in my country that have insisted the workforce read the following improving texts. Say, okay, if this is an exchange of ideas, I'm willing to have an exchange of ideas. Here's some books I think you should read. Let's do a swap. Can have a book discussion.
Give them the madness of crowds.
I couldn't say it myself. But if your child is at school and they're being taught racial bias stuff, if they're being told that they're intrinsically racist, take your child out of the school or go to the school and say, I will not have racism taught to my child. Not in any direction. You don't get to do it. Now, if enough people did that, it would stop. It would stop. I have versions of the words people should use. Say to people trying to do this, I will not take part in the re-racialization of my society. I will not. If you want to do it, you can do it to your kids, and they will suffer the poison from it. Not my kids. Not on my turf. If every parent who was worried about this did that, it would stop. It would stop tomorrow. The reason it doesn't is because of intimidation.
Fear. People are afraid.
And, you know, there are lots of reasons historically for people to be afraid. But in America today, it isn't easy for people. I don't by any means underestimate this. But it's better than at any time in history to voice what you know to be true.
I think my answer is much simpler. It's to show up. You have to show up. You have to show up and you have to pay attention and you have to really understand what people are talking about. And ask questions if you don't understand. I would say the first thing to do is don't even challenge at all. Just ask questions. Well, what does that mean? What do you mean when you use the word equity? What does it mean to have an inclusive space? Because an inclusive space ultimately means that you have to have a speech restriction. Because if you didn't, people wouldn't feel welcome, and then they wouldn't feel that they're included in the space. So I think it's important to show up, ask questions, be on the same page about what people mean about words. And I know that must sound academic, but it's not. Because that's one of the ways that people are being fooled by this, is that we're being beholden to these words that we don't know what they mean. Well, of course there should be equity in a school system. Really? Well, what do you mean by equity? The other thing I think people should do is, you're absolutely correct. People will be ridiculed or they'll be treated with derision if they question this dominant moral orthodoxy. And I think what they have to do is to not be intimidated by people who do that. And among the ways that you can do that is you can find people who have similar views. You can go online. In person, of course, it's difficult now. But I think as long as you have an ability and a sincere ability in yourself to be willing to revise the beliefs that you have, to be willing to change your beliefs, even if the people with whom you're talking don't have that, I think that is a way for you to take the legitimate moral high ground. And not just moral high ground, an intellectual high ground too. What else do you think people can do to fight back? To say, when people have had, either if they've had enough already, or they're seeing it rise, like the frog in the water. The frog in the boiling water. Do you have that expression on the island? Okay, so there.
We have frogs.
Okay.
We can even boil water.
I don't know if you had stove.
We mastered the
I don't know if
boiling
you have
water
stove
a few
technology,
years ago.
but okay.
We're there.
So what? This interview might be over very quickly.
In an act of racial violence.
So what do people do if they've either? Here's what I really want to say. What do people do before they've had enough? They see the writing on the wall. What do they do?
First thing is to trust their instincts. Trust their instincts and know that if there's something that makes them uncomfortable, it isn't because what's happening is true, but because what's happening may be false. Everything says to them, if you are uncomfortable, that's good. Actually, your instincts that tell you, I'm uncomfortable about that thing happening. Quite often it's because the thing that is happening is wrong. Trust your instincts on these things.
It's really interesting. I would say trust your doubts too.
Yes, absolutely. And test them out against other people's. Organize, definitely. Group, speak up. And I mean, people also need to know the simplest shortcuts to try to undermine the reprehensibly demoralizing and divisive things of the time. I suggest a number in The Manners of Crowds at the end. One of the simplest and most effective is just to always say, compared to what? What exactly are you comparing us to? If you say we live in a racist society, compared to what? Compared to where?
Right.
Name your country. Name your country. If you say at this point we are living in X situation, compared to what? What historic situation is it that you would like us to be aiming for? And
on that note, I would say when you do have these conversations, keep your cool.
Oh gosh, yes.
Keep your cool.
Yeah.
Because invariably, if people choose to have those conversations with you across that divide, they are not keeping their cool.
No, I've noticed that.
And most of the time it's because they've come from a university system where they've never heard those ideas. So they're brittle. And so when they first hear them...
Yes, and I'd also add that the woke ideology, like all ideologies that claims to be totalistic and comprehensive, has massive advantages because it tells people what they should be doing with their lives, and it tells them the meaning of life, and it gives them purpose and much more, as we described. But it's also wildly simplistic. It's both simultaneously both highly complex and wildly simplistic. And my own view is that, among other things, we need to reacquaint ourselves with the real complexity of life, which is that people are complex, that we are not in an existential fight between the children of light and the children of darkness. It isn't an endless replay of the 1930s in which you are the anti-Nazi and everyone on the other side is the Nazi. It's more complex than that, and it runs through all of us. That's why I particularly mind the cult-like thing of saying, if your parents don't agree with you or your grandparents don't agree with you, cut them off, cut off relations with them. Apart from the fact that that is a cult behavior, pure and simple. It ignores one of the most important lessons in life, which is people you love will think differently from you.
And that's okay.
And that's
In fact,
okay.
that's probably good,
Can
ultimately.
you imagine how boring the world would be if everybody you loved and met in your life all thought exactly the same as you? It shouldn't be the aspiration. It shouldn't be the desire. Sure, we can agree on things that on some basic standards, but other than that, you'll lose elections, you'll win elections, your guy will win, your guy will lose.
And more often than not, if somebody has a different belief, if someone holds a different belief, it's not because they're a bad person.
No.
It's either because they have different starting information, or maybe they know something you don't know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's one of the most important lessons, isn't it? Assume it's possible that the person you're dealing with, particularly, I have to say, an older person you're dealing with, may know something you don't, may know something about the world that you don't. It's such an important thing for people to realize, and to realize, as you say, it's such an important point, is that people who think differently from you do not necessarily think differently from you because of malign motives.
Right.
And in that case, that's really interesting to find out why they think the way they do. And you may discover the worst case scenario is that you have a different view, and the fact that they think differently helps you realize why you think as you think. Best case scenario is if they're right and you're wrong, you should learn fast that's the case. So if you are setting up a system in which you believe you're solving every inequity on earth and actually you're creating hell, you should find out about it fast. Don't waste a day more of your life on this crap. And don't make people around you who love you and who you love suffer because you've given in to a cult-like behavior.
And we've created that exact system. We have agents of misery everywhere.
Absolutely. And just one other thing on that is, we should realize this is not what we should spend our lives doing.
Right.
We live at the most fortunate time in human history. We have access to almost all of the world's information on a tiny device in our pockets. We can listen to the world's music, read the world's texts, communicate to people on any other continent on the planet at any time we choose. The idea that we're spending these years talking about race and character traits, we could work out how to live on Mars in this time. We shouldn't be wasting this time. We should be using it well.